Welcome, everyone. Nick Wagner Sr. Welcome to another episode of the Full Potential Podcast. I'm thrilled to be here with you tonight, Sunday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Joy is, I think, 3 hours behind, so she's the afternoon for her on the West Coast, but thrilled to be here. And every Sunday night, we bring to you an amazing guest to talk about their career journey. And the interesting thing about our guest tonight with Joy, and Joy will introduce herself in a second, is how a passion project really has turned into your career, Joyce. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about leaving a very successful corporate job to go run your own nonprofit, which seems like very scary to a lot of people, but you made that leap this year. So we're going to talk about that. And then I think, and the other really important thing we're going to talk about besides your career is this topic of mental health, and specifically maternal mental health, which is probably something that many of my audience members have probably not heard about before. We all know about mental health, but we're going to talk about what that is like for a woman that is pregnant or just gave birth, which I think will be really interesting. So we do this. Joy. People always ask me, like, why do I do this every Sunday night? And it's my way of giving back, because my hope is that people can hear inspirational career stories like yours, especially early career professionals that don't really know what they want to do with their life and their career and their job, and they can hear from someone like yourself and be like, wow, like that's really cool what Joy did, or how Joy handled this situation, or how Joy learned from that. And that is my hope, is why we do this. And I think, Joy, with everyone really a lot of people struggling right now, because a lot of people have lost their jobs. My hope is that, those that are open to work can watch things like this and be inspired on Sunday night to hopefully get some ideas. So I really appreciate you making time. So Joy Burkhard, welcome to the Full Potential Podcast. And if you could share a little bit about yourself with my guests, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, great. Well, it's great to be here, Nick. And I am so appreciative of what you're doing for young people entering their careers, and also for what you've taught me around leadership and the work that we were able to do just briefly at Cigna, but it really resonated with me. So thank you for having me, and it's great to be here to help give back as well. A little bit about me. It's like hard to sum things up, but I am in my mid-40s. I'm going to start there. I'm a mother of 2 kids, and that's not always easy. I'm going to say that straight up, including or especially right now, with the struggles that so many of us are facing with COVID and lack of school and childcare, and concerns about our own kids' well-being. And I also have the privilege of leading this great movement for mothers around mental health, and also helping them engage in our political process and passing policy that supports motherhood. So that's me in a nutshell. There's more to it, which I hope, and I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about that journey tonight.
No, we will definitely dive into that. And I hear you on the how difficult it is to be a parent right now. And I know we're going to talk a lot about mental health tonight. And I think everything, especially with COVID, a lot of people's mental health is a challenge right now, and that includes us that are parents trying to parent our kids. I actually told my son today that I want to be a better dad to him, because I've been so stressed out, and I feel like you take it out on your kids, right? So we'll talk about this, but so why don't we? I want to, before we dive into your career, Joy, and everything about it, I just want you to tell everyone, what is Mom 2020, right? So what is this nonprofit that you started 9 years ago, that you lead? I want to just kick off with that, because I want to then take people through the journey of how you ended up running a nonprofit in your mid-40s focused on, mental health for mothers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our mission is to close gaps in maternal mental health. And Nick, you mentioned some of your listeners know a lot about, or may know, of course, about mental health, and just how many people are impacted by mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, PTSD, OCD, something we don't talk enough about, the range of disorders, not just severe mental health disorders. But mothers are not immune. And for so long, there was this notion that because women wanted to give birth and were meant to give birth, often want to give birth, I should clarify, not everyone does, but that somehow we were immune to mental health disorders. And in fact, it's one of the most vulnerable times of a woman's life, and women are more likely than men to suffer from mental health disorders anyway. But this is a very vulnerable time, and up to 1 in 5 women will suffer from a maternal mental health disorder during pregnancy, which we're not immune during pregnancy either. And often we only talk about the postpartum period, and we only talk about depression. And there's a range of disorders. Anxiety is actually the most common, and it confuses women often to hear about postpartum depression and think, well, boy, I'm pregnant. I'm not in the postpartum, and I don't think I'm depressed. I'm just so anxious. I can't sleep. My heart is racing. I'm worried. I'm angry. These are signs of anxiety versus depression. And often, I should clarify too, because I think some men might be listening, that men are not immune either. We're here to talk about mothers, and we're really focused on sort of where we can stop the bleeding. And mothers, we believe, is where we need to start. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be more work to be done. And we're really focused on the health delivery system. So closing gaps. If we're all paying for insurance premiums, for example, personally, our employers, society, for those who need help, the benefits that were sold should be available, and we should be diagnosed if we have trouble. And that's not common. Even with maternal mental health disorders, we're often not diagnosed because of our multiple reasons, but one of the big ones is our bifurcated mental health system. And this is a nice segue into like why me, and why the portion of my career journey we'll talk about here in a moment sort of led up to my wanting to do some of this work, among other things as well.
And Joy, we will absolutely share your LinkedIn profile in our show description so people can get in touch with you, as well as your website so people can get in touch with your organization. But I'm going to just go out on a limb here and think to myself, when you were a little Joy and you were like 7 or 8 years old, this was probably not at the top of your mind on what you wanted to do when you grew up. So I always start kind of on the journey with my guests on what was that thing that when you were growing up as a kid you wanted to do when you grew up.
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, I think like the women listening, many of us dreamed of being a mother. So that first and foremost, when I was 7 or 8, that's what I thought about when I wanted to grow up. And I thought I wanted my name to be Kelly, which has nothing to do with motherhood, but that's coming to mind too, right? So you make up names and you think about how many babies you're going to have and what that dream life might look like. And so I knew I wanted to be a mother. I didn't know how many kids and what their names would be, but for some reason I felt like that name Kelly resonated with me. And now I work with a Kelly and have a Kelly in my life on my family's side through my husband as well. So it's funny how you manifest things in those ways. But my dream job as I got a little bit older was to become a high school principal. And that's what I knew, is sort of leadership in school and how could I help in the environment that I knew. And so becoming a high school principal is what I thought I might do when I got older.
And was that desire to go into the education space because of a family member that was in education?
No, I love that question. It's mostly that's where my leadership opportunities kind of bloomed, was starting in education, and really not until high school, which is why high school principal comes to mind. I was really shy. I have a twin sister, and thank goodness for that, because if I didn't have like that security blanket, someone that I always knew was there if I needed something, I think I wonder if my career journey might have been a little bit different. I think not, but it was nice certainly to grow up with someone in the background. And she was quite shy too, and now as adults we're not. So that's good hope for those of us that have shy kids.
It's interesting how you evolve. So high school principal, and I know you went to college for communication and business. Was it an expectation in your household growing up that Joy was going to college, or was that really up to you to decide?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I was from one of those families where no one prior to our generation had went to college. So really blessed to have been raised by this amazing mother who I'll have to show this podcast to, who was a single mother. And I can't imagine, let me just say that, like when you get sick and you have to take care of your kids and you can barely get out of bed, like there's just so many moments where I think, thank goodness I have someone I can lean on. But So my mother was a flight attendant and a hairstylist and a secretary, and she was a secretary while raising us, my twin sister and I, and then our little brother, who was born 7 years later. And so we were not even really. I don't think my mom would have, of course, dissuaded us from going to college, but I think she saw it in us because we just had a lot of dreams that we might go on to college.
That's interesting. And to your point, right? I mean, raising one kid as a single parent is difficult. Raising three is even harder. What was the rationale behind going to school for communications and business? Was that, that doesn't sound like it really aligns to being a high school principal. So I'm going to guess someone gave you some advice that would be a good path for you.
Yeah, I love this question too, because there's people that come into our lives at various points, and it was actually my stepmother who founded her own. She was in public relations, and then founded her own public relations firm that invited me to do a PR internship with her. And actually, I was really intrigued by organizational development, leadership. How do we find our fire? How do we together move mountains? And so I was in the communications school, and she actually went to Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona, where I went too, and just thought, we were just excited about communications. And I said, yes, of course, I want to do this internship with you and come to Colorado for the summer. And so I did that. And anyway, long story short, I realized I did not want to move into PR, that was a lot of sales, like pitching why a client might need an interview on a product launch and things like that. And that was difficult for me. And in fact, in that summer, I decided I wanted to clean her office and organize her office more than making those phone calls. So that's what I ended up doing. And like taking my stepbrother and sister, who I adored, around to their school activities. That's how I could contribute to my stepmom's career and help with my internship. So I learned right away that was not for me. And that's why internships are great too, to experiment with what you might want to do or what you might not want to do. And I actually went into it thinking, this sounds pretty cool, and I think I could do that. I liked writing and press releases and dumbing down concepts that might be hard for people to understand. But I realized PR was not the perfect place.
I think you bring up a great point. I love the comment you make about doing the internship. You didn't look at it as a failure because you didn't like PR. You actually looked at it as a positive because you realized, hey, I don't want to do this. And that's the point of internships, is you figure out what you like and what you don't like. And is this what I want to go in my career? And the answer was no. So I think that's great advice. So you didn't like doing PR. You ended up graduating with a degree in communications and business. What was the plan when you were done with school? Now that you realized PR wasn't for you, like what did you think was going to be that next step after college?
Yeah, I mean, I dreamt of doing things like you do, Nick, like organizational development and helping leaders find their way. And, that was sort of tangible to me. Not that it wouldn't potentially lead back to a career in education, but I knew I wanted to explore that first. And so I dreamt of those things. And of course, it's you probably, Nick, in your career, like, you don't, maybe you did just sort of land in the job that you always wanted, or in the department that would take you to that job. For me, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And luckily my university had like many job placement fairs and things like that. And there were 2 jobs that I applied for and 2 offers. Then it wasn't as hard as it is for young people right now to receive offers. Very little salary, I remember. I mean, it was a lot for me, but like looking back, I'm like, I don't know if those were so exciting, but it was working at a department store in like this buyer management position, which sounded really intriguing and kind of fun for a young girl. And then Cigna Healthcare. And I had the good fortune of growing up at Cigna in Arizona. They have what's called a staff model, where the doctors are employed by the insurance company and the name is on the building, and you go and it's a one-stop shop. And we grew up our whole lives in a Cigna a Cigna healthcare delivery system, and our pediatrician's name was Dr. Beanstalk. Like everything was just really great about that experience. So I was intrigued by that, and also they paid just like $1,000 more than the other job at the time, and it was right down the street from my parents. So that's the job that I went with, and the doors opened from there, and lots of opportunities existed because I took that job.
And what was what was that actual first job that you took? Like, what were you actually doing?
Yeah, that's great. It was actually, I was very lucky that Cigna at the time was recruiting from the 3 universities in Arizona for management trainee positions, which we don't see often anymore, is what I understand, which I think is unfortunate. I had an opportunity to rotate in various departments at Cigna, which was another reason why I was a little bit intrigued. I started in the HR department, and I moved to a call center, customer service management role, which is scary when you're right out of college and you haven't even
Yes.
been a customer service agent before. I went into another role within the sales employer service department. And really, I was grateful for the rotations and the experience to really learn the business quickly. It's a great question.
Yeah, that's another thing that I think I'm glad you bring that up, because that's another thing that I always try to stress to like early career individuals, that try as many things as you can when you're early on, right? Because to your point, you had these rotations where you could try all these different things, and as you get further on in your career and you get more tenure, it's harder to do those short little trials in different jobs. So I think that's great advice. You mentioned that you mentioned a lot of different reasons why you ended up taking this job over the other job that you had offered. But I want to just ask, real quick about the idea of working in healthcare, right? And this idea of working in an industry that really is about people. Was that something that you really gave a lot of thought of, like, wow, this could be really fulfilling? Or was that just kind of something that eventually you learned as you went, that, wow, like I really do change lives? Like how did you kind of think about that when you took the job?
Yeah, I was naive. I think that I my dad in Colorado, my stepmom, with my stepmom in the internship, just said, like, that is such a great field. It's always going to be stable, which, we know now with COVID, it might be the first time where some of that has changed just slightly. But I didn't think about the rewards that would come, because I didn't really know what would happen if you weren't a frontline healthcare provider.
Right.
And so it was very abstract to me. Now I wouldn't change it for the world. And I loved working for, I should say, a Fortune, I think at one point 50, maybe still a Fortune 50 company, but my point is a very large company where you do have an opportunity to stay within one company and really learn the business and the field. That was so incredibly rewarding. And I think our healthcare delivery system is so complex. It's hard to think about, boy, can I make a difference? And to your point, Nick, in my one little role, and I think depending on the role that's true, but it's mostly the engine that can or cannot, in my mind, sort of make a difference. And being a cog, it's sometimes hard to understand your way. But I think regardless of where you land and what career field, you can always make a difference as an individual. And I certainly had an opportunity to do that at Cigna, and I was lucky that Cigna gave me leeway, and also I found the roles where I could kind of design my ability to impact lives in a really productive way.
Yeah, you bring up another really, I think, awesome point, that I think a lot of people sometimes are afraid to work at a large company because they almost think they're not going to make a difference, right? Or they're going to kind of get lost. But I think you gave some valid reasons on why you thought you did make a difference, and actually the fact that the company was so big, over your 20, I think it was 24 or 25 year career, you had various roles, and you didn't have to leave the company to get that different experience, because it was just so many opportunities within the company, which I think is really interesting. You ended up eventually leaving Arizona and moving farther west, right, to California. What was when you made? I want to talk about that decision to leave Arizona and to leave that part of your career and actually go to California. Was that a hard decision to like? What did you move to California for a job? Did you move to California for family? What was the reason for the move, and how
Yeah.
did that impact your career trajectory?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I was so shy, as I mentioned earlier, I probably would not have left Arizona had it not been for a boyfriend and a fiance who worked in Los Angeles at the time for the Los Angeles Dodgers and couldn't come back in PR, actually, really interesting, and really wasn't on a trajectory to come back to Arizona at any point. And it's funny, he our marriage didn't last. Nick, we talked about are any of these things off limits, and they're not, because life is hard, right? But I give that relationship a lot of credit for the doors that it opened for me to get out west, as you mentioned, out to California, and really have more doors, opportunities to walk through those doors than I probably would have in Phoenix, in Arizona, excuse me. In California, there's been great doors that have opened to me because of that relationship. So I moved out here for that. We were married here, and I stayed, and he moved on, and back to Arizona actually, and then other places. But I'm here and remarried and started my family, and just I guess I think that's an important point too, is from a career and family perspective, is sometimes the journey is not what you expect, and there may be a reason why what you might think is a blip and a hardship happened, because more great opportunities are coming your way.
And and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's not an easy thing to share for people. Did you do the same job in Arizona as in California, or when you made the transition, did you actually switch into a different role?
Yeah, I did switch into a different role. And it actually was not a role that I would have signed up for, honestly. I interviewed for two different roles, and one was in a sales department, which I mentioned I didn't like sales and PR, but this was sort of sales service work and interacting with clients on the back end when something sold, which I think I could have done fairly well. Interestingly, because of some kind of a personality test, Nick, which I know we do in leadership, I was determined not to be a good fit for that role. And instead, I was hired. And this is interesting too. I was hired for an underwriting role, which is financial in nature, and providing quotes to businesses that might want to come to Cigna on what it would cost them. And this is not something that I would have ever considered. But interestingly, the HR manager at the time said, "You are the perfect fit for our culture." And he was really about culture. And it was actually a really phenomenal couple of years for me, because it's there that I learned that I had a love for regulatory compliance work. And I always had this intrigue for politics and legislation and things like that. And it gave me some opportunity to dig into regulatory compliance, and the underwriting department didn't really have a person managing, like, yeah, you can't quote that benefit in our underwriting role because it's not allowed in California and Arizona, etc., but you can quote this one. And so it did open this world for me. And so again, not exactly what I would have picked, but I think my journey changed, and it did open different doors for me because I had that experience versus if I had gone into sales.
And I don't, you don't often hear people say that they really get excited about regulatory compliance. So we
Yeah.
got to make sure we kind of caveat that, because it's super complicated, regulatory compliance, and it to your point, it's political as well, right? Because every single state is a little bit different, and there's a lot goes into it. You ended up being a compliance manager at Cigna, which was obviously very, very regulatory and compliance focused. Do you credit that underwriting job that you didn't even really think you were going to take as kind of like leading to that role?
Yeah, it did lead to that role, and I started in Orange County, if folks know California, quite a distance away from Los Angeles, where I wanted to ultimately be. And I was able to take a job in regulatory compliance in Los Angeles. And yeah, I think so much of it is luck and timing, and that happened to be the case. And I interviewed with someone that I was close to at Cigna for a very long time, Bill Jameson, who anyone at Cigna listening will remember Bill and know Bill, who just, it felt like such a great fit for me. And so it wasn't necessarily the underwriting job, which I kind of hinted at. I think it gave me the confidence to know that I could do it and I had something to give, and the experience. But it was mostly that the timing worked out and I applied for that job and got it.
So you mentioned that you have a 12-year-old, which would put that around 2008. At what point did you take this compliance role?
Yeah, he was just born and he just had walked in, by the way, and I was hinting like, go, go, go. The door is still open, so I might get up here in a moment and shut it. But he was not born yet. So I was still married to my ex-husband at that point. And he was born, I was remarried, oh goodness, 3 or 4 years later. And my son was born 3 or 4 years after that.
And so this is an interesting time because you have your son, you have a new job. At this point, Joy, was this whole idea of 2020 mom in your head as something that you wanted to do? Was maternal mental health something that was on your radar at this point, like being pregnant and working in the healthcare space, or did something happen that all of a sudden, kind of opened your eyes to this? Because I want to try to, help paint the picture for the audience.
Yeah. Something happened, and that's usually what leads us down these paths, right? To think about new opportunities. And it was four worlds. Sometimes I say 3 worlds collided, but really I had 4 different things happening in my life at the time, when I knew that I was meant to maybe be at Cigna for a while because I was learning so much, but also to do something else. And that was, I am going to shut this door. Hold on just a minute, Nick, because my dog just came in and my son left. So I had been at Cigna for several years, and I was volunteering for an organization called the Junior League. And this was also something that I'd encourage, especially your young listeners or those who are working with young people, to really think about volunteer opportunities in the community, because it certainly it was the start of what opened doors for me in a very significant way. And I had several people keep saying, like, you should check out the Junior League. And it was like 2 people. After the second person, someone at Cigna said it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go figure out where do I go to a meeting and check it out. And so I've been volunteering with the Junior League and just loved it. It filled a void for me. I did things in student council and high school and other things I hinted at, and had not really found my place after graduation. And that volunteer work led to some policy work, which I mentioned I was always intrigued with. So I had an opportunity to dabble with policy in the Junior League. And I also had just become pregnant with my own son, Alex, who walked in here just a moment ago. And the final thing is that I had a little brother. I mentioned that I have a twin sister and a little brother. And sadly, he struggled with mental illness much of his life. And very early, we knew he had social anxiety. He would cry when my mom would drop him off at preschool, and it wouldn't stop, right? We know often separation anxiety is real, but a couple years he would cry, and he'd cry all day. I mean, it's a real struggle that we couldn't quite put our finger on as a family. And he had tragically, after my real interest in trying to help him navigate the healthcare system, it was on February 13th. I was new to this role, Nick, in the legal department at Cigna in Los Angeles in the Glendale office, and was away on a trip to Colorado with my family, and my little brother took his life. And so I knew that this work, that I was in a position to understand the complex health delivery system. I just had my own son and barely got out of a deep, dark depression, meaning I didn't fall into a deep, dark depression. I had help from my husband and I think a little bit of self-awareness that something was wrong and the ability to get help, which not all moms do. And so I walked the line, but never fell into the trenches of depression, but did have a prior episode of depression. So I knew what it felt like. And so my worlds collided a bit here in that at the junior league, there was an article, Nick, that you read, that a young Olympic athlete actually wrote about losing her twin sister to postpartum depression. Now we know it's postpartum psychosis. I mentioned there's a range of disorders, and psychosis is different than depression, but she took her own life. And it was all of these circles that converged for me. And I thought, if it's not me that goes deep here, then who will go deep?
Yeah, and first I want to say I'm sorry for the loss of your brother. I'm sure that's still hard to this day, even though it was quite some time ago. And I think for a lot of people listening, they've not experienced something like that. So I can't imagine how that affected your family. But I do love how you turned the darkness into the ability to help, right, with your initiative. And I think what I think is striking for this is that what you're now doing today in your role was, as your full-time position was all, kind of started by these experiences that you had, right? And your volunteer experience and your love for the healthcare system and your ideas to help with policy issues, and then your own personal experience of having depression after your son was born. Did you know, at that point, Joy, what this would turn into and a vision of where you wanted to go and what Mom 2020 would be? Or was it, you knew you had to do something, you just didn't know what it was?
Yeah. Well, the great thing about volunteering in the junior league was that it was this young woman who read the article in Glamour magazine about the Olympic athlete who submitted an idea for a law. And she said, I think hospitals should provide information at discharge to families about these disorders and where to find help. And I was in something called the State Public Affairs Committee within the Junior League in California at that time, and got to take this idea from the Los Angeles Junior League. There were 17 junior leagues in the state, and take it to the State Policy Committee to look at all the idea submissions. And everyone loved this idea that, boy, we're not doing enough around mental health and for women. And so it was that idea that ended up being submitted to become a law. And it was at the height of a budget crisis. And there was concern that hospitals, and we're in another one of those now too, hospitals really couldn't afford to do more work at this point. And instead, we should turn that law into an awareness resolution declaring the month of May Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month. And it was the legislature that tucked in that awareness resolution this idea that volunteers should form a task force. And that's when I knew, Nick, thank you for connecting the dots, that, boy, if it's not me, then who is it? And I honestly, I felt like it should be a doctor, or it should be a clinician, somebody that was like qualified and knew about mental health in a deeper way than I did. But what was really needed was someone who could convene multiple people. And I felt just bold enough to be able to do that, nervous, but bold enough to do it and give it a try. And one thing led to another. And we ended up forming the nonprofit 2020 Mom.
And that was in 2011, correct? That was 9 years ago. Because you just had your
Our
90th
name was
birthday.
different then, and we focused only on California, and realized shortly thereafter that these platforms for change that we were identifying were intriguing to others, not just those who were in California. So hospitals, insurers, policymakers, like, what can we really do here?
So this is a great example of the power of volunteering and philanthropy, and how giving back to your community can not only help, right, but also change your life and your career at the same time. So so you started 2020 Mom in 2011. You're working at Cigna full time. You're starting a family. You're doing all these things. I don't know how you do all these things at once, right? Well, that could be a whole other podcast of how you manage your time, Joy, right? But at what point, as you kind of continue your career at Cigna, you're raising your family, you're volunteering with your nonprofit. At what point did you get the sense that you needed to do this full time, right? And I asked that because you've been doing this for 9 years now, and you might not have thought about that when you created this, right? Like, hey, I'm going to one day quit my job and do this full time. But at what point did you think, I need to do this? I need to do this all the time. Like, I need to leave my job.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it was actually sooner than you might think. We knew that there was a lot of work to be done very early on, once we formed 2020 Mom. And my struggle was that it was very much an underfunded field or topic area. And just recently, because of the work of 2020 Mom and several other organizations, one that's been around for quite some time, finally this issue of maternal mental health has gained some traction, in part because there's a real clear linkage to child development now, and strong mothers providing a foundation for strong children, right? Which just seems like a slam dunk for those of us that are moms. Of course, that's true, but many of the funders are those that provide philanthropy dollars to nonprofits are now investing in maternal mental health when they haven't before. And it was really it took 9 years to get to be, I think, very lucky in that a big funder from Washington State, and I think it's safe to mention this funder because they deserve a lot of credit, are really helping several other organizations, not just 2020 Mom, to go deep and to become what I say, become whole, because I did this work full time, unpaid, and I was able to do it for 9 years because Cigna gave me flexibility in my schedule, and I was able to work at home. And so much kudos to Cigna to be, I was able to juggle all that I could because of my flexible schedule. But the Perigee Fund ended up investing in 2020 Mom just a few months ago, right before COVID hit, and I was able to step back, and we say we were able to really become whole and catch our breath and continue to do the work that we're doing, particularly around federal policy to change the landscape.
So, and that congratulations. I think it's probably a dream of a lot of people to actually take their nonprofit and do it full time. But I have to ask the question. You're working for, and we're actually a Fortune 15 company now.
15. Thank you.
Yeah, 15. Were you scared to leave your world of 20 plus years at Cigna and everything that you knew and where you grew up and where you're obviously successful and had friends and colleagues and just you built this life and this career? Were you afraid to leave and go off on your own?
It's funny, I wasn't afraid to leave. I mean, I was nervous about leaving them with work that would be hard to I felt this obligation to finish everything, which of course I couldn't finish.
Right.
But I mean, it's certainly, Cigna is still very much a part of my family. I'm texting people just yesterday, and my former boss and several former bosses. And so it's become, certainly was a family for me. It wasn't scared because I actually built this team around me. Even though I wasn't drawing a salary, the money that we were able to raise, I was able to bring on other moms who suffered from mental health disorders, most of them, to support the work. And so for me, it was really an opportunity just to catch my breath and get to be with them. And we hoped to really propel the work. And of course, with COVID striking, we haven't been able to propel yet for various reasons, but we know we're going to get there. So yeah, I miss them. It's my family, and it wasn't scared. It was sad and grateful. And I had the most wonderful virtual going away party. It's an incredible family for me at Cigna. So mostly sad, I would say, and celebratory that I got to create this chapter with them.
What do you say to people that, because I think a lot of people, Joy, actually wouldn't do what you did. I think a lot of people wouldn't leave the stability of a job they know and a career they know and a company they know
Mhm.
out of fear and the unknown. And I mean, I know that you mentioned that you've gotten a lot of support from a financial perspective for your nonprofit, but I mean, I'm sure you and your family sat down and said, look, this obviously there's risk here, right? There's risk leaving the position you were in and going to work for your nonprofit. What's your advice to people out there that are maybe thinking, and look, it doesn't have to be, it could be any career change, right? It could be, going from one job to another, or it could be leaving to take care of a family member or leaving to go to another company. What's your advice for people when they're thinking about, like, why should I or shouldn't I do this?
Well, I have to admit that my husband is our rock that keeps our family stable. I'm the dreamer. So I had dreamed of leaving Cigna to really go deep with 2020 Mom, even without a stable salary. And he would always walk me back and say, let's wait. Like, if you have this solid foundation that you're building, it's going to come. And he was right. So it wasn't scary to me. And I don't think it was scary to my husband at all either, because we really were in a place financially because of this funder to get to pay for benefits and salary for 3 years. It doesn't mean that in 3 years we might not be like searching for that funder again, and whether that funder will be there. I have high hopes for the nonprofit space, by the way. So I think the funder will be there for us, and we'll be able to prove, and so will the others be able to prove that this is a great investment. But that was why it was my rock that kept me from leaving. So that would be a great question for Mark, my husband, who's in the other room. Like, you finally felt okay, and I think he'd say, because I knew it was after 9 years, and I knew that we would, she would succeed, especially with this funding for 3 years.
Well, I think it's a great point on how important your family was in the decision, but also that, I don't want to overlook this, that 9 years is a good amount of time. That's a huge investment, right? And I think a lot of people, Joy, you and I we're not millennials or Gen Z. I will put it that way, right? We are Gen X. So the younger generations, I think, at times are used to getting things very quickly, right? Because they've had access to technology their whole life, and you spent 9 years building something before you went and did it. That is a huge commitment, and it is not overnight. So I think it shows your dedication to the cause and the amount of people you were trying to help and support with what you're doing. So I think that's awesome. So I want to just, last thing I want to ask is, so your last day at work, your last day at Cigna, you've been there, I think it was almost 25 years. Do you remember your first day, and how different was that from your last? Like, what did you remember about your first, and what is the big memory of your last day? Because I think those are obviously two milestone moments for you.
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, I'll leave the word community. Like, I found friendships my first day with those that started in the management trainee program, that I'm still in touch with those people, those friends, and the community that I built or surrounded me. I didn't build it. That surrounded me, that I was lucky to be a good part of. Like the support. I guess that's what I'd say, Nick, is that it takes a village, right? It takes a village to build a career and to open doors. And that I was really lucky that I had these amazing people around me. And the last thing I'll share is this stuff is not hard. Like, this may sound like dreamy, and working hard is all you need to do. There are so many hiccups and sleepless nights and so many struggles. And so I especially want non-Gen Z. I mean, I want Gen Z and millennials, non-Gen Xers and above, to know that this is hard work and it takes resilience, and you're going to get punched down and you're going to get back up again. And that's just what it takes. If you want to have a career, starting a nonprofit in particular, or a 25-year career at any company, like there are twists and turns and hard moments, and it gets better. There are always doors that open, and you can choose to go through them and find your village, and know that you don't have to be perfect, is one thing I mentioned in a post that we put up on LinkedIn today, that you don't have to be perfect to do good and find a great career. That's not the expectation. And I fear that kids and those who are entering careers now feel like they won't be worthy enough unless they're perfect. And that's not the case. You don't have to be perfect. Just keep trying, getting back up and rolling up your sleeves and wanting to do good.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And before I get to my last question that I close with about your advice for some people, I want to just mention, so it's 2020mom.org. That's your website where you can learn all about, the nonprofit and what your organization is doing. I just want to reiterate how important this whole topic of mental health is. So, I mean, we're all living through COVID together. Mental health is a huge topic for people, I think now more than ever, because a lot of people are now realizing, Joy, that wow, like this is really something that we don't talk about a lot, and there is a huge stigma around mental health. And I love that you're focusing on mental health, and your focus on this specific need around maternal mental health. I think is just fantastic, and I you can people can read all about a lot of the work that your organization's done on your website. But do you want to just highlight a couple things that your organization has done to help with mental health for mothers that maybe that you're really proud of, that you want to share?
Yeah. Thank you, Nick, for asking that question. And you're spot on that now more than ever, people should not be shy, and find a friend to talk to if you're struggling, or someone else is struggling. Ask them about it and be open to learning more. At least 50% of Americans will suffer from a mental health disorder once in their lifetime. That was at least once, prior to COVID. Those numbers are like all of us are going to have a blip, and we get treatment right away so that it doesn't become more serious and chronic. So what I love about maternal mental health, though, is that there's a medical onset. So, right. And so we get to be a bridge. This cause gets to be a bridge to fixing the larger health delivery system, because if we can fix it with medical onset in an OBGYN's office or family practice office, or even pediatrician's office, by talking to a mom, then we have ability to think about how do we scale those fixes into the larger mental health system, which is what gets me most excited. Moms, again, stopping the bleeding. We have to start with moms and kids, but we have an opportunity to really fix this for the larger population. We passed a law several years ago here in California that we're helping to replicate through other organizations nationwide, to require that those treating mothers screen for maternal depression and anxiety. And we have seen what was so exciting once that law passed. It was effective July 2 years ago. I remember going into my doctor's office down the street here, and when we came to the desk to sign in, they gave us a survey. They gave me a survey to fill out about mental health. And so we knew that because they don't know who's pregnant necessarily or who's postpartum, you can't tell by looking. That survey and that questionnaire, the depression questionnaire, went to everyone. And we've heard that this is the case, across the state. And they call it the curb cut effect. If you do work in social change, it means you're working with one population, but you get to see benefits spill in to the others. It's like cutting curbs on sidewalks for those who might be in a wheelchair, to be able to cross the street. And there's benefits to all of society, right? Because we can push strollers. Moms is a great example. Kids can ride bikes. So that was a great curb cut moment for us at 2020 Mom. And there's other great examples, but that one really stands out to me to share tonight.
That's really cool. And it would be awesome if you could maybe eventually get to the point where not only do moms and women get asked that question, but I've always dreamed of having mental health a physical for mental health every year for individuals, right? Because we have physicals for our physical health. And I mean, and right, we get asked some questions asked about mental health, but it's not super in depth like physical health. And I think is if we can keep trying to overcome the stigma of mental health that people have, I think we'll eventually, with organizations like yours, make such a huge impact. So I love that example. All right, so last question, and then we'll get you out of here. I always close with the same question with every guest. What is the one piece of advice, Joy, that you would share with my listeners and my audience that's helped you reach your full potential? So what is that one thing that's helped you be so successful in your corporate career and in your nonprofit career?
I would say explore the word creativity and pause and think about doors that are opening for you. And so I think what has made my life different than perhaps some others who might be even better positioned to do this great work than I, right? I'm not perfect, but I would start to see these possibilities. Like, boy, if this were to change, then that would change the system. And that comes from this sort of mindset of creativity. And I know people say, well, I'm not a creative person. I don't draw. I don't like play instruments. And I did some of that stuff as a kid, but not a lot. It's more about pausing and taking it in. If you have a sleepless night, like what are those thoughts that are coming to you? Write them down. Better yet, like hopefully you don't have sleepless nights. You go on a walk and you think about, connecting dots. What is your brain trying to tell you? And I would say hone in on those messages. For me, I think that's what set my career journey apart. I think we all might have some of these experiences, not hopefully a tragedy, but still, I think I might have followed this path perhaps anyway, even without a tragedy, because these doors were opening for me and I connected dots and knew I need to walk through certain doors.
I think that's great advice. And, Joy, you truly are an inspiration. I really appreciate you making time. And I know you have your family and your nonprofit. So thank you. Say hi to the dog for us behind you. But it was great having you on the show. Some great advice. I think people will love to hear your story about your career journey. Again, we're going to link to your LinkedIn profile in the show description. So if anyone wants to connect with Joy, you can follow her on LinkedIn. And then we'll also link to 2020mom.org so people can learn more about your organization, Joy. And again, I just want to say thank you for the fantastic discussion tonight and making time for us.
Great, Nick. I appreciate that too. And if I can leave one last word that we shared with some of our listeners tonight, that the year 2020 has not been a good one. And that 2020 going forward will mean vision for moms and a vision forward, not the year 2020. We made it this far. We laid great groundwork and are ready to move forward with great vision for mothers and mental health. Nick, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And I'd love
Absolutely.
Stay connected with any of your listeners and help them with their career journeys as well.
Thank you, Joy. Stay safe and be well. We'll talk soon.